The skies over the Middle East are ablaze, not with the sunset of the desert, but with the flashes of ballistic missiles and the breathtaking close approaches of stealth fighters. But all the noisy back-and-forth military strikes between Israel and Iran over the past few days have in reality been nothing more than the prelude to a far more terrifying geopolitical earthquake. A gigantic specter has now officially stepped out of the fog of war, an entity whose mere clearing of the throat is enough to force the Pentagon into an emergency study session, and whose single nod could sink the entire old world order into ashes. Yes, Big Brother Russia has officially revealed itself, no longer through hollow diplomatic expressions of concern, but through real battlefield moves stretched tight as a bowstring. Forget the shallow news bulletins you hear every day. What we are witnessing is no longer a simple regional conflict between an arrogant Tel Aviv and a grim, silent Tehran. This is the moment when the global geopolitical chessboard is about to be flipped over. When Russia's heavy transport aircraft land one after another at military bases in Iran, carrying gifts of death that can break every technological advantage of the West, that is the moment the United States and Israel understand that the game has changed. Moscow's silence over the past weeks now turns out to have been the stillness before a violent storm. Now, as the most advanced S-400 air defense systems and Su-35 fighter squadrons begin to appear in the skies, Israel's position shifts in an instant from hunter to encircled prey. Washington is truly panicking. That panic does not come from threats, but from the brutal reality that their protective Iron Dome umbrella in the Middle East is being slashed apart by Russia with one razor-sharp stroke. We are standing at the threshold of a great war in which just one small spark, one miscalculation by an F-35 pilot or a Russian missile officer could untie the knot of World War III. What exactly is Moscow plotting by deciding to go all in to protect Iran? How destructive are the massive weapons Russia has just sent to Tehran, enough to shake the entire American war machine? And most importantly, where will the world go when the two poles of power, Russia and America, confront each other directly on a real battlefield? Greetings to our viewers watching on the Outward Insight channel. Today, we will dissect the stunning card flip from the Kremlin, the move that is making the Middle East hotter than ever and pushing humanity to the edge of a war with no winner. Before we go into the detailed analysis, please like and subscribe to the channel so you do not miss any important videos on global economic movements. Part 1. The heavy cargo leaves Russia as the S-400 and Su-35 change the game. My friends, do not let the soothing diplomatic reports from those Western men deceive your eyes. The truth unfolding is far more brutal and naked. The giant air bridges between Moscow and Tehran are not simply transporting supplies. These are flights carrying death itself, flights redefining the entire concept of air dominance as Russia's super heavy Un-124 Ruslan transport aircraft thunder down onto secret military runways in Iran. The whole world holds its breath, because what emerges from those enormous cargo bays is the nightmare called the S-400 Triumph and the sky assassins known as the Su-35 Flanker E. This is not merely a transfer of weapons. This is Russia directly slapping the military doctrine of the United States and Israel in the face, a doctrine entirely dependent on absolute control of the skies. Look at the brutal reality Tel Aviv is being forced to face. For decades, Israel has been proud of its F-35 Lightning II fighters, symbols of stealth and unmatched superiority against enemy radar. They believed they could fly anywhere and bomb any target in the Middle East without fear of retaliation. But that was the story of the past. Before the arrival of Russia's S-400, the S-400 was not an ordinary air defense system. It is a military artificial intelligence entity capable of sweeping away every hope of stealth. With a range of up to 400 kilometers and the ability to lock onto dozens of targets at once, from supersonic fighters to cruise missiles, the S-400 turns the skies of Iran into a high-voltage electric grid. It takes only one moment of carelessness from an F-35 pilot for that aircraft, worth hundreds of millions of US dollars, to instantly become a fireball before it even sees its killer. Moscow has sent a steel-hard message. From this point on, this airspace is no longer your private playground. And that is not all. The appearance of the Su-35 at Iran's bases is the truly fatal blow. If the S-400 is the solid shield, then the Su-35 is the razor-sharp sword ready to sever every ambition of penetration. Remember this. The Su-35 is a highly maneuverable, next-generation fighter, something that even the most seasoned American pilots must treat with caution in simulated combat. Once Iran possesses a fleet of these fighters operated by pilots trained thoroughly in Russia, the balance of power no longer leans to one side. Israel will have to recalculate every millimeter of its flight path. One small mistake, one moment of arrogant carelessness, and the price will be an entire elite squadron. Russia is not only giving Iran weapons, it is giving Tehran eyes to see through the night and claws to rip apart enemies from afar. Why did Russia choose this moment to send its massive arsenal? The answer lies in the resolve of a big brother seeking to establish a new multipolar world order. Moscow understands that if Iran collapses under the blows of the U.S.-Israel alliance, Russia will lose its most important strategic ally in the Middle East, and NATO's pincer grip will tighten even further. The transfer of these cutting-edge military assets is an all-in move, a declaration of the Kremlin's dominant position. Russia does not need to declare war with words. It declares war through the power of electronic systems capable of blinding every American spy satellite. Imagine Russia's Krasuka, 4 electronic warfare systems deployed around Iran's nuclear facilities. They can turn Washington's most advanced UAVs into headless flies, completely disconnected and dropping like autumn leaves. Israel's panic is no exaggeration. They understand that their technological advantage of so many years has been flattened after only a few Russian cargo flights. Every S-400 system installed is an official no-fly zone established. The United States may send dozens more aircraft carriers into the Mediterranean or the Red Sea. But what is the use of aircraft carriers when the aircraft on them do not dare take off for fear of being shot down by Russian missiles from hundreds of miles away? Washington is falling into a deadly dilemma. Either continue supporting Israel in attacking Iran and face the risk of a direct collision with the Russian military, or step back and accept a stronger Iran protected by Moscow. This is no longer a game for amateurs. This is a chess match played by masterminds in Moscow, where every card turned over makes the other side tremble. Russia's heavy arsenal sent to Iran is not there merely for defense. It is there to deter, to declare that the era of American supremacy in the Middle East has come to an end. The world is holding its breath, watching every movement of those missile launchers, because behind those cold masses of steel lies the iron will of a great power that never accepts retreat. The real game is only now officially beginning, and from a more balanced position than ever before. Russia is smiling as it watches the confusion of those who call themselves the police of the world. Part 2. Israel's Achilles heel when the sky no longer belongs to Tel Aviv alone. The legend of an impregnable fortress called Israel is being shaken harder than ever. For decades, the Israeli military, the IDF, built an image of invincibility, a small nation with technological fangs capable of piercing any air defense net in the Middle East. They took pride in the Iron Dome for intercepting short-range rockets, the Arrow system for intercepting ballistic missiles, and above all, the F-35 I.AN.RA fleet, which was seen as the very definition of aerial power. But all that glory now seems to be fading in the face of a harsher reality with the arrival of the Su-35. Israel is exposing deadly Achilles heels the moment Russia begins to step into the game. The greatest mistake of Tel Aviv and the hotheads at the Pentagon is arrogance. They believed American stealth technology was absolute, a kind of magic capable of blinding every radar system. But wake up. When Russia brings its long-range tracking radars and its most advanced electronic reconnaissance systems to Iran, the so-called stealth of the F-35 suddenly becomes more laughable than ever. Russian radar does not see aircraft with the naked eye. It sees through multiband wave spectrums capable of detecting the slightest disturbance in the air. Israel once flew over Lebanon and Syria as casually as going to the market. But now, every time a Jewish fighter takes off, it is already sitting clearly on the monitoring screens of Russian officers in Tehran. Command of the skies, the very lifeline of Israel's military strategy, has now been severed by Russia with one sharp stroke. Look deeper into the economic and battlefield equation of Israel's defense system, and you will see the panic spreading in silence. Iron Dome and David's sling may be modern, but they carry within them a fatal weakness: cost and quantity. One Israeli Tamir interceptor missile costs around $50,000 to $100,000 US dollars, while Iran's long-range ballistic missiles and suicide UAVs, optimized by Russian guidance technology, are far cheaper. This is a savage war of attrition. Iran only needs to launch hundreds or thousands of decoys alongside real missiles to overload Israel's processing systems. When Tel Aviv's wallet runs dry and its stockpiles of interceptor missiles are exhausted, that is exactly when its steel sky collapses. Israel is falling into the trap of using expensive weapons to fight cheap ones, a trap Russia has arranged with extraordinary sophistication. But the real Achilles heel lies not in weaponry, but in geography and psychological warfare. Israel is a small country with no strategic depth. Every air base, every power plant, every technology center lies within reach of the ballistic missile complexes Russia has just upgraded for Iran. In the past, Iran may have been hesitant because of precision concerns, but with support from Russia's GLONASS satellite navigation system and specialized signal receivers, the margin of error for Tehran's missiles is now measured in meters. One direct punch at the military airports housing the F-35 fleet would instantly paralyze the Israeli Air Force. The preemptive strike Israel so often used to intimidate others is now being studied by Iran and prepared for return on a scale far more terrifying under the guidance of Big Brother Moscow. Tel Aviv's panic also comes from realizing that even America, its final pillar of support, is exposing deadly holes. Washington's rushed deployment of the THAAD system along with thousands of troops to Israel is not a sign of strength, but the admission of weakness. It shows that Israel's domestic defense network has reached its limit. America is being forced to patch up its ally in anxiety because it understands that THAAD and Patriot are also just lifeless masses of steel. If Russia chooses to activate heavy electronic warfare systems, just one wave of a powerful electromagnetic pulse or a cyber attack, collapsing the command network, could turn the entire billion-dollar defense structure of the U.S. Israel alliance into a heap of useless scrap in the desert. We are witnessing a complete reversal. The hunter is now pulling inward to defend itself. The skies of the Middle East are no longer a solo stage for F-35s carrying the Israeli flag. Russia has erected an invisible but powerful wall of fire around Iran, turning every airstrike attempt by Tel Aviv into a suicidal mission. When the Achilles heel of defense is exposed and the technological advantage is flattened, Israel is forced to face a cruel truth. It is no longer in the dominant position to command the entire region. The price of arrogance is the collapse of outdated military doctrines. Russia is not only bringing weapons, it is bringing a new battlefield mindset, one in which the strongest is not the one with the most expensive aircraft, but the one who knows how to turn the enemy's advantage into a burden. The game in the Middle East has shifted from a gunfight to a battle of brains, and in that battle, Israel is running out of breath before the unpredictable fluidity of the Russian bear. Part 3. America's Move. Panic Behind Hollow Warnings. If you look only at the press statements coming out of the White House or the Pentagon, you would think Donald Trump is still in control, wearing the calm posture of a superior power. But strip away that glossy diplomatic shell. What remains inside is absolute panic, a strategic psychological shock that America has not experienced since the end of the Cold War. The moment Big Brother Russia officially placed heavy military assets onto the scale of the Middle East, all of Trump's warnings about not testing our patience suddenly became as light as feathers, like the roaring of an old lion that has lost all its fangs before a pack of wolves protected by the Russian polar bear. Why is America panicking? Look at the frantic way it is rushing to deploy terminal high-altitude area defense systems and thousands of troops to Israel. This is not a move to display strength. It is a desperate firefighting act. In American military doctrine, deploying THAAD is the final solution, a life-or-death last barrier activated only when an ally's air defense networks have already been pierced or are at risk of total collapse. Washington is being forced to drain its own strategic stockpiles to patch up an Israel trembling before the specter of Russian-Iranian missiles. The presence of THAAD is itself a tacit admission that Tel Aviv's Iron Dome and Arrow systems have failed, and that if America does not directly become a living shield, its most important outpost in the Middle East could be flattened in no time. But the tragedy of the Americans lies here. The deeper they step into this war, the more clearly they expose the confusion in their global strategy. Washington is being torn apart between two brutal pincers. On one side, it cannot abandon its beloved child Israel, the symbol of Jewish influence and power in American politics. On the other side, it is terrified of the prospect of a direct confrontation with the Russian military on Iranian soil. Moscow has calculated with extraordinary cunning, pushing the United States into a no-win dilemma. If America attacks Iran to protect Israel, it will run into S-400 and Su-35 systems directly operated by Russian advisors. A direct clash between American troops and Russian troops, there would be the irretrievable trigger for World War III, a scenario that even the fiercest hawks in Washington dare not imagine, while the American economy is as fragile as glass. The emptiness of American warnings is also revealed by the fact that economic sanctions have completely lost their magic. For years, the U.S. used the financial club to subdue stubborn states. But once Russia and Iran joined hands to establish their own payment system beyond the U.S. dollar, Washington's sharpest weapon suddenly became nothing more than scrap paper. America is shouting about new sanctions, but Moscow responds only with a sneering smirk. The more sanctions are imposed, the more heavy cargo Russia sends to Iran. The more pressure is applied, the tighter the Moscow-Tehran axis draws its geopolitical encirclement. Washington is helplessly watching its soft power melt under the scorching heat of Middle Eastern fire. Observe the confusion of the American carrier strike groups lingering offshore. Those once mighty symbols of U.S. naval power have now become massive, slow-moving targets in the face of the hypersonic anti-ship missiles Russia has quietly supplied to Iran's proxy and regular forces. American admirals understand that in a modern firefight, aircraft carriers are no longer masters without absolute protection in the electronic domain, and electronic warfare happens to be Russia's specialty. The fact that America must keep its carrier groups at a safe distance, not daring to move close to Iran's coast, is the clearest evidence of fear before the claws of the Russian bear. This panic is also spreading to America's Arab allies. They see a Washington that is running out of breath, an aging empire no longer capable of protecting even itself, let alone anyone else. America's security promises now sound like the empty, sweet talk of a bankrupt man. Meanwhile, Russia presents itself as a true big brother, speaking little and doing much, and when it acts, it brings the kind of weaponry that is ready to change the game. This contrast is pushing America into the most severe crisis of confidence in modern diplomatic history. America's frantic moves in the past 2 days are merely a desperate effort to keep alive the corpse called the unipolar world order. When warnings become hollow and military actions become merely reactive, the United States is exposing its own weakness before a Moscow that is confident and fluid in its strategy. Washington's nightmare is not war itself, but the realization that the era in which America could single-handedly cover the whole sky has officially come to an end. Russia is calmly controlling the rhythm of the match, leaving its opponent to spin and worry, and one miscalculation after another. Part 4. The new geopolitical map, the Moscow-Tehran axis stretched tighter than a bowstring. Yes, my friends, do not look at the Russia-Iran relationship as a forced marriage of temporary convenience. What is unfolding in the Middle East is the formation of a new geopolitical steel axis, a life-and-death alliance forged in fire and in the harsh sanctions of the West. When Moscow decided to empty its vault of military treasures for Tehran, it was not merely protecting an ally. It was redrawing the global map of power, pushing Washington's influence back to the edge of the abyss. The Moscow-Tehran axis is no longer a vague concept on paper. It is a battlefield reality, ferocious and full of resolve, ready to tighten the noose around NATO's vital nerves. Why does this combination make the Middle East tighter than a drawn bowstring? Because this is the perfect fusion of a nuclear power with an enormous arsenal and a nation whose geography sits at the throat of the world's energy supply. Russia needs Iran to open the door to the south, to escape Europe's sanction siege and find access to warm oceans. Iran, in return, needs the giant shadow of the Russian bear to guarantee its survival before the gun barrels of Israel and America. This is a perfect symbiotic relationship. Russia provides technology, long-range firepower, and electronic warfare experience. Iran provides a widespread proxy network and the ability to create chaos at flashpoints from the Red Sea to the Mediterranean. Look at the new geopolitical map this axis is creating. In the past, America could comfortably move the chess pieces of the Middle East through its Arab allies and Israel. But now, every move by the White House meets fierce resistance from a unified alliance bloc. Moscow has turned Iran into an unsinkable aircraft carrier right beside American military bases. The appearance of Russian missile complexes on Iranian soil is nothing less than a suspended death sentence hanging over every expansionist plan of Tel Aviv. Russia is not merely a seller of weapons. It is the author of the new rules of the game. When Russian commanding officers sit at the operations table with the generals of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the world must understand that any violation against Tehran will be treated as a direct declaration of war against the Kremlin. This bond also carries the color of a purge against the old unipolar order. Moscow and Tehran are proving to the world that the era in which America could use the U.S. dollar, and carrier fleets to subdue sovereign states has passed into history. The Moscow-Tehran axis is creating an independent political military ecosystem in which Western sanctions are reduced to worthless scraps of paper. Together, they are developing transcontinental transport corridors and jointly researching suicide drones capable of humiliating even NATO's most advanced air defense systems. The tension here is not only the risk of bullets and missiles erupting, but the tension of a great transfer of power from west to east, where the upper hand now belongs to those bold enough to challenge the old order. Washington is looking at this alliance with absolute dread. It tries to use diplomatic tricks to divide them and to intimidate neighboring countries, but all of it is useless before the reality that Russia and Iran have bound their destinies tightly together. Moscow understands that if Tehran falls, Russia will lose its southern firewall, and the flames of the Middle East will spread rapidly into Central Asia, directly threatening its own domestic security. That is why Russia's shipment of heavy weapons to Iran is not a gamble, but a carefully calculated strategic investment. They are playing a massive game of Go in which every S-400 launcher is a piece that locks down the enemy's field of vision, and every Su-35 squadron is a deep thrust into the psychological warfare of those Western men. This situation is pushing the Arab states into an extremely difficult position. They see that America is growing weaker and is no longer a safe pillar. Meanwhile, the Russia-Iran axis is rising strongly with terrifying battlefield assets. The shaking of the old alliances in the Gulf is Moscow's greatest success. Without firing a single shot at Arab countries, Russia can still force them to reconsider neutrality or even tilt toward Moscow in exchange for peace. The new geopolitical map no longer has the clear borders of the Cold War era. It is a tangled network of interests and deterrence in which Russia's military presence in Iran has become a constant that cannot be erased. The Moscow-Tehran axis is the worst nightmare that strategists in Washington ever imagined. The combination of Putin's cold political resolve and Tehran's fierce spirit of resistance has created an entity powerful enough to break every American ambition for supremacy in the Middle East. When the geopolitical string is stretched to its maximum, only one small impact is enough to collapse the whole system. But from the conductor's position, Russia is keeping that string from snapping in the way most beneficial to itself, forcing its opponents to whirl in confusion and drift into fatal miscalculations. The world is witnessing the birth of a new order, one in which Big Brother Russia has officially put an end to the American dream of ruling the globe alone. Part 5. The scenario of World War III as the Middle East fuse burns to the edge of the powder keg. Humanity is holding its breath, following every heartbeat of the Middle East, where the trigger of a global war is no longer a fanciful hypothesis in detective novels. We are facing a brutal reality. The distance between fragile peace and mass destruction is now measured only in the decisive seconds of officers on alert at Middle Eastern missile bases. When Big Brother Russia officially entered the game by erecting a steel belt to protect Iran, it deliberately or unintentionally pulled the entire world into a deadly chess match in which one wrong move by any side could trigger a chain reaction leading straight to World War III. Why is the Middle East trigger more terrifying than any other hotspot on the planet? Because this is where extreme ideologies, immense energy resources, and the direct confrontation of nuclear powers converge. Imagine this scenario. An Israeli F-35 squadron, under pressure from the hotheads in Tel Aviv, decides to carry out a preemptive strike on Iran's Natanz nuclear facility. But instead of facing outdated air defenses, it collides with brutal interception by S-400 systems operated directly by Russian military advisors. One F-35, the pride of American technology, is shot down and its pilot is captured or killed. Immediately, Washington is forced to intervene to save face, and the moment U.S. Tomahawk cruise missiles begin raining down on Russian positions in Iran, that is the opening gunshot of a war with no end. The presence of Russian military assets in Iran has created a mobile red line. In the past, America drew that line, but now Moscow is the one holding the pen. The World War III scenario would erupt like dominoes. Israel attacks Iran. Russia retaliates to protect its ally and its military assets. America jumps in to rescue Israel, and Iran's proxy forces such as Hezbollah and the Houthis launch simultaneously, paralyzing American carriers and Gulf oil facilities. Oil prices leap to $300 a barrel. The global economy collapses within weeks. This is not a random chain of events, but a system of variables already in place, waiting only for one mistaken click to explode. The world is witnessing the convergence of a geopolitical triangle of doom: Russia, Iran, and China. While Russia provides the shield and the spear, Iran provides the battlefield, and China stands behind with endless financial resources to sustain this confrontation and weaken the West. Once the Middle East catches fire, America will be completely bogged down, forced to pull resources away from Eastern Europe and the Pacific. That would be the golden moment for newly rising powers to carry out their own territorial and power calculations. If World War III happens, it will not be confined to the burning deserts of Iran, but will become a total multi-front assault that destroys the entire security and financial system America has built over nearly a century. Human panic at this moment is completely justified. Russia is no longer playing cat and mouse. Sending electronic warfare systems capable of blinding America's GPS global positioning satellites is itself a veiled nuclear deterrent message. If America cannot navigate, its nuclear warheads become blind points in the sky. Meanwhile, Russia and Iran possess hypersonic missiles capable of piercing every shield NATO currently has. When the balance is shattered by Russia's superiority in real battlefield technology, the likelihood that one side may launch a reckless preemptive strike to save itself becomes extremely high. That is the darkest scenario of doomsday. We are living through days more tense than ever before. Days in which the sobriety of leaders in Moscow and Washington is the only thing preventing the world from falling into the black hole of catastrophe. But remember this: Russia is holding the key to this trigger. It knows how to heat the atmosphere to the highest limit in order to force concessions from its opponents. And yet it is disciplined enough not to let the powder keg explode too early before achieving its geopolitical objectives. However, in war, miscalculation always exists. A missile going off course, a misunderstanding in intelligence, or simply the excessive arrogance of a ruler. Any of these can turn the scenario of World War III from these lines of analysis into brutal reality outside your window. The fuse has burned to the very edge of the powder keg, and the smell of smoke has already begun to thicken in the air. Will the world have enough resolve to put it out, or will we together witness the collapse of a civilization under the heat of nuclear warheads and the fluid confrontation between Russia and America in the Middle East? The answer may appear in Russia's very next troop movements toward Tehran. Part 6. The fatal blow through the economy, the Strait of Hormuz, and soaring oil prices. If guns and missiles destroy the enemy's manpower on the battlefield, then energy is the bloodstream that sustains modern civilization. Russia and Iran fully understand that to topple an empire as exhausted as America and its Western allies, they do not necessarily need to destroy every carrier fleet. Sometimes all it takes is a single blink at the Strait of Hormuz, the economic throat of the world, to make the entire Wall Street financial system collapse in a chain reaction shock. When Big Brother Russia sends coastal defense systems, Bastion P batteries, and new generation smart naval mines to Tehran, it is handing Iran the key to locking the economic gun barrel of the world. Look at the numbers. Nearly 21 million barrels of crude oil per day, equivalent to 21% of all global liquids consumption, must pass through the narrow Strait of Hormuz. This is not just a shipping lane. It is the lifeline whose severance would cost not just money, but governments themselves. Washington is panicking because it knows that with Russian backing, Iran is no longer a country that can be bullied by sanctions. On the contrary, Tehran and Moscow now hold the power to pull the plug on the Western economy. Just imagine a scenario in which Iran declares the closure of the Strait of Hormuz in retaliation for an Israeli airstrike. Immediately, oil prices would not stop at $100 or $120. They would rocket straight to $150, even $200 a barrel within 24 hours. The cunning part of this fatal blow is that it strikes exactly at America's inflation nerve center. Donald Trump is already struggling to control domestic gasoline prices in order to maintain his seat in elections. But Russia is using Iran to burn all those efforts to the ground. Once energy prices skyrocket, transportation, manufacturing, and food costs will rise in lockstep. How will an America drowning in debt withstand that when its people can no longer afford to fill their gas tanks? Russia is carrying out a total economic warfare strategy in which every S-400 installed in Iran is not merely for shooting down aircraft, but for protecting the choke point of Hormuz so that it always remains under the control of the Moscow-Tehran axis. Furthermore, Russia's fluidity in economic weaponry also lies in linking Middle Eastern energy markets to a multipolar financial system. When the Strait of Hormuz is threatened and oil flows to the west are blocked, Russia and Iran can still establish alternative overland routes toward China and India. Customers hungry for energy and willing to pay in local currencies instead of the US dollar. This is a perfect double strike, paralyzing the American economy while accelerating global de-dollarization. Russia's dominant position is shown by the fact that it does not need to directly shut off its own oil valve. It only needs to enable Iran to do it under the name of legitimate self-defense. The West is falling into the trap it set for others. For decades, it used energy as a sanction weapon. But now, with Russia and Iran, two resource giants, joining hands, that weapon has changed owners. Israel may have the most advanced fighter squadrons, but aircraft cannot take off without affordable fuel. And the Jewish economy would collapse if its ports were blockaded by Russian stealth naval mines. Washington understands that if it lets the conflict escalate to the point where Hormuz is shut down, that will be a death sentence for the dollar and the end of the American hegemonic era. We are witnessing a battle of minds on the energy chessboard, where Russia is calmly controlling the tempo. Every time America threatens sanctions, Russia responds with another shipload of military equipment to Tehran, indirectly reminding Washington that the switch controlling oil prices is in Russian hands. The current tension in the Middle East is not only about bullets, it is a war of economic survival. When oil reaches $150, inflation will wipe out every economic achievement of the West, throwing societies into chaos and unrest. That is the true power of the massive Russian arsenal sent to Iran, not just explosives, but the ability to trigger a global economic catastrophe without firing directly at American troops. The world stands before a historic turning point. Whoever controls the energy flow controls the absolute power of life and death over the global economy. With the patronage of Big Brother Russia, Iran has become an untouchable strategic gas station. America and Israel may writhe in panic, but they are forced to confront a cruel reality. If they dare cross the red line in Iran, they will pay with the collapse of the entire financial system they spent decades building. In this economic game, Russia is leading by a safe margin, leaving its opponents to struggle inside a whirlpool of oil prices and inflation with no way out. Part 7. The world's reaction, the rise of new powers, and the helplessness of the old order. While smoke and fire cover the skies of the Middle East, and Russian cargo planes continue pouring military shipments into Tehran, the whole world is not simply watching in fear. We are witnessing a historic great polarization. The reactions of countries to Moscow's dramatic reversal are not just diplomatic statements, but a major pivot marking the rise of a new bloc of power directly challenging Western supremacy. If America and Israel are panicking in the swamp of war, then on the other side of the globe, the new powers are quietly deploying their pieces to bury the unipolar era. Look at the giant of the East, China. Beijing is playing an extraordinarily subtle and steady role in this game. While Russia is the one holding the gun to protect Iran, China is the one holding the money and acting as the architect of a post-conflict economic order. China does not condemn Russia, nor does it criticize Iran. It simply signs long-term energy agreements in yuan and pushes trans-Eurasian economic corridors. For Beijing, Russia's shipment of heavy weapons to Iran could hardly be better news. It forces America to pour all of its resources from aircraft carriers to defense budgets into the black hole of the Middle East, leaving a giant power vacuum in the Pacific. China is smiling as it watches its greatest rival bog down while it quietly secures resources and expands influence through BRICS. Speaking of BRICS, we cannot ignore the shifting attitude of regional powers such as India, Brazil, and South Africa. These countries have grown tired of being subjected to unilateral sanctions imposed by Washington. The close military cooperation between Russia and Iran, two core members of the expanded BRICS, has become a model of resistance. The countries of the global south are looking at the Middle East and realizing that if they want true sovereignty, they need a multipolar pillar instead of relying on a world policeman that has long been biased. The helplessness of the United Nations in preventing Israeli airstrikes or Russian escalation is the death bell for the old international institutions. The world is witnessing the formation of a practical United Nations within BRICS itself, where Russia's military power and China's financial strength create a counterweight that cannot be pierced. Even America's traditional Arab allies in the Gulf, such as Saudi Arabia and the UAE, are showing reactions that leave the White House stunned. Instead of siding with Israel against Iran as before, they are choosing conciliation and moving closer to Moscow. Why? because they understand that America no longer has enough resolve to protect them from the S-400S and Su-35S that Russia has just handed to Tehran. The Arab states are now playing a multilateral diplomatic game, maintaining ties with Washington on one hand while applying to join BRICS and deepening military cooperation with Russia on the other. They recognize Russia's dominant role in determining regional security and do not want to become sacrificial victims in a war that America is not certain it can win. The rise of these new powers sends a steel-hard message. The world is no longer NATO's private playground. When Russia sends weapons to Iran, it is the trigger signal for a global diplomatic and economic offensive. Countries long ignored by the West are now gathering under the banner of sovereignty and multipolarity. They see in the Moscow-Tehran axis an alternative, a real battlefield power capable of breaking Washington's will. America's failure to rally the world into sanctioning Russia or Iran is the clearest proof that Western soft power has disintegrated. We are living in an age when the old rules are being torn apart and new orders are being written in blood, fire, and cross-border capital flows. The rise of new powers is not merely a trend. It is an irreversible geopolitical revolution. Russia has succeeded in creating a precedent. A country under total sanctions can still change the military balance of an entire region and attract other powers to its side. From the dominant position, Moscow is not only supplying weapons to Iran, it is supplying a new operating system for the world. One in which real strength and respect for sovereignty determine the future, not hollow warnings from Washington. Pay attention, my friends. The world's reaction to Russia's intervention in the Middle East is a bitter admission for the West. Their era of dominance is over. The rise of the multipolar bloc, led by Russia and China, is building a strong wall protecting a new world order. America and Israel may still have advanced weapons, but they have lost the most important thing: the support of the majority of the world and control over the rules of the global game. In this match, Big Brother Russia has calculated dozens of moves in advance, and the rest of the world is beginning to place its bets on the new winner. The cards have now been laid bare in the Middle East. America's crude intervention, met by the bold resolve of Big Brother Russia, has officially closed the era of empty warnings. What we have just dissected is not merely a military news report. It is a warning bell crashing directly into the minds of those still deluded by the fantasy of a unipolar world order dominated by Washington. Once Moscow's heavy systems take root on Iranian soil, a new reality has been established. The power to determine the region's fate has changed hands. Israel, with its proud F-35 squadrons, must now learn to live with fear before the all-seeing eyes of the S-400. America, with its giant carrier strike groups, is being forced to taste the helplessness of an aging giant bogged down in the very strategic swamp it created for itself. And Iran, under Russia's protection, has risen into an impregnable fortress, a sentry station guarding the energy throat of all humanity. Our future stands at a fork in the road, either a cautious multipolar coexistence or a global inferno from which no one can stand aside. Will World War III erupt or not? The answer no longer lies in Washington or Tel Aviv. It lies in Moscow's ability to maintain its dominant position, and in the awakening of the West to the reality that it no longer has the right to command the rest of the world. In this game, Russia has not only won militarily, it has also won in psychological warfare and geopolitics. The Middle East is on fire, but amid those ashes, a new order is taking shape, one in which real battlefield power and respect for sovereignty are the final voice. Thank you for accompanying Outward Insight on this journey of decoding these terrifying upheavals. Do not forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you do not miss the sharpest, most battle-grounded analyses of the flow of global power. Yeah,